Jack Harper was an ordinary guy working at an elite private club in Washington, D.C. He wasn't wealthy, had no influential connections, but always did his job well. As a waiter, he was used to serving high-profile guests, politicians, businessmen, celebrities. But he never expected that one night he would find himself at the center of a scandal that would change his life forever. It all started on what seemed like a normal evening. The club was filled with important guests, including Barron Trump, the son of the former U.S. president. He arrived with his security detail, but, as usual, carried himself with quiet politeness. Jack noticed that Barron seemed a bit off, perhaps tired of all the attention or lost in his own thoughts. As Barron made his way toward the exit, he accidentally tripped over the edge of a rug. It was a brief moment, barely noticeable to most, but Jack reacted instantly. Without thinking, he stepped forward and caught Barron by the shoulder, steadying him before he could fall. "Are you okay?" Jack asked. Barron nodded, giving him a grateful look. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It was nothing, just a small act of kindness, helping another person." But that moment didn't go unnoticed. A few influential guests in the room exchanged disapproving glances. Someone pulled out their phone, likely sending a message to someone important. Jack felt the tension but thought little of it. However, a few hours later, the club's manager called him into his office. "Jack," the manager said coldly, "you're fired." Jack froze. "What? Why?" The manager's expression remained unreadable. "You touched Barron Trump." That kind of interaction attracts unwanted attention. Our guests don't want unnecessary disruptions around such figures. "I was just helping him," Jack protested. "Is that a crime? This is not up for discussion. You have 10 minutes to collect your things." It was unfair. Jack felt anger boiling inside him. But he knew arguing was pointless. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the club. Stepping onto the cold Washington streets, he took a deep breath. He had no job now, no stable income. In an instant, everything had collapsed. But he had no idea that the next day would change his life forever. Jack spent the night tossing and turning in bed, replaying the events in his mind. It didn't make sense. How could a simple act of kindness cost him his job? He had always been careful at work, never overstepping boundaries, never making mistakes. And yet, here he was, unemployed and unsure of what to do next. By morning, his phone was flooded with messages from coworkers who had heard about his firing. Some were sympathetic, others were too scared to say much, afraid of getting in trouble themselves. But one message stood out. "Unknown number. Jack, I need to speak with you. It's urgent. Call me back." Jack hesitated. He didn't recognize the number, but curiosity got the better of him. He dialed. After 2 rings, a deep voice answered. "Jack Harper?" "Yes, who is this?" "You don't need to know my name yet. Just know that what happened last night didn't go unnoticed. Meet me at the Lincoln Memorial in an hour." Jack frowned. This was starting to feel like a scene from a spy movie. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I know what really happened at the club. And because your life is about to change in ways you can't imagine." The call ended. Jack stared at his phone, his heart pounding. He had 2 options: ignore the message and move on, or show up and find out what this was about. Something told him this wasn't just about losing his job. An hour later, he arrived at the Lincoln Memorial. The crisp morning air did little to calm his nerves as he scanned the area. Then a tall man in a black coat approached him. He had the look of someone who was used to operating in the shadows. "Jack," the man said, extending his hand. "I work for someone very interested in what happened last night." Jack shook his hand hesitantly. "Who exactly do you work for?" The man smirked. "Let's just say, someone with enough power to turn your bad luck into the greatest opportunity of your life." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. This was bigger than he had thought, and he had no idea what was coming next. Jack could feel his pulse quicken as he studied the man in front of him. There was something about him, an air of confidence and authority, that made Jack feel both intrigued and uneasy. He had dealt with plenty of powerful people during his time working at the club, but this was different. "I'm listening," Jack said cautiously. The man gestured toward a bench overlooking the reflecting pool. "Let's sit." Jack hesitated for a moment but followed. As soon as they were seated, the man pulled out a sleek black folder and handed it to him. "Inside, you'll find a contract. Read it carefully." Jack flipped it open. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages. His name was already printed at the top, as if someone had anticipated this meeting long before he had even lost his job. "What is this?" Jack asked, his voice edged with suspicion. "An opportunity," the man replied. "You were fired for doing the right thing. Some people noticed, people who value integrity. This contract is an offer to work for them." Jack frowned. "Who exactly are they?" The man smirked again, but this time, it wasn't just amusement in his expression, it was calculation. "Let's just say, people who believe in rewarding those who stand by their principles." They have connections in places you wouldn't believe, and they want to help you. Jack felt a mix of excitement and skepticism. The club had fired him over something as simple as helping Barron Trump. Why would anyone care enough to track him down and offer him a job? And what exactly would I be doing? The man leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. You'll be working in security, but not the kind you're used to. Private, high level, discreet. You'll be protecting individuals who matter, people who need someone they can trust. Jack swallowed hard. He had no military background, no specialized training beyond his experience as a bouncer. Why me? The man's eyes studied him carefully. Because you didn't hesitate to help someone who needed it, even when it cost you. That's rare, and that's exactly what we need. Jack looked back down at the contract. The salary was nearly triple what he had been making at the club. The benefits were better than anything he had ever seen. And yet, something inside him hesitated. If I sign this, what's the catch? The man chuckled. No catch, just a test. Jack's brows furrowed. What kind of test? The man stood, adjusting his coat. A real one. If you pass, you're in. If you fail, well, let's just say you'll walk away with an interesting experience and a generous severance package. Jack's mind raced. He had spent the last 12 hours feeling like his life was spiraling out of control. And now, out of nowhere, he was being handed a lifeline. Or was it something more? He glanced up at the man. When does the test start? The man smiled. Right now. Jack barely had time to react before he heard footsteps behind him. He turned just as two men in suits approached, their expressions unreadable. Come with us, one of them said. Jack looked back at the man in the black coat. I thought you said this was a test. The man gave him one last smirk. It is. And just like that, Jack's life took another unexpected turn. Jack's heart pounded as he followed the two men through the darkened streets of Washington, D.C. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, casting eerie shadows around them. He had no idea where they were taking him, but he had made his decision. There was no turning back now. The taller of the two men, a broad-shouldered figure with a military-like presence, glanced at Jack as they walked. Nervous? Jack let out a short laugh. Should I be? The man didn't answer, just smirked slightly before gesturing toward an alleyway. In here. Jack hesitated for half a second before stepping in. The alley was dimly lit, lined with dumpsters and scattered trash. It was the kind of place where trouble found you before you even knew it was coming. Then, without warning, the second man, a leaner, younger-looking guy, lunged at him. Instinct kicked in. Jack dodged to the side, feeling the rush of air as a fist narrowly missed his jaw. His adrenaline spiked as he spun, raising his fists. What the hell? Before he could finish, the taller man moved in. He was fast, faster than Jack expected for someone his size. A punch aimed for Jack's ribs connected, knocking the wind out of him. Jack staggered but didn't go down. His instincts from years of bouncing in nightclubs took over. He feinted left, then delivered a sharp elbow to the leaner man's gut, sending him stumbling back. But the taller guy was a different beast. He came in strong, his movements precise. Jack barely dodged another blow before landing a solid punch to the man's shoulder. It didn't even faze him. Jack's mind raced. This wasn't some random bar fight. This was controlled, deliberate, a test. Is this supposed to prove something? Jack growled, stepping back to create distance. The tall man wiped a bit of blood from his lip, grinning. It proves how you react under pressure. Jack's muscles tensed, but the men didn't advance again. Instead, the leaner one straightened up and nodded. Not bad. Jack frowned. So did I pass? The taller man chuckled. That was just the warm-up. Before Jack could respond, the sound of tires screeching filled the alley. A black SUV rolled up, its windows tinted so dark that Jack couldn't see inside. The door swung open. Get in, the taller man said. Jack exhaled sharply, his breath still coming fast from the fight. He could walk away right now. No one was forcing him to go any further. But something told him that whatever was on the other side of this moment was bigger than he had imagined. With one last glance at the men beside him, Jack climbed in. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The SUV's interior was sleek. Black leather seats and tinted windows that made it impossible to see out. Jack barely had time to settle before another voice cut through the silence. You did well. Jack turned his head. Sitting across from him was the man in the black coat, the same one who had approached him earlier. Was that really necessary? Jack asked, rubbing his ribs. The man smiled. It was. Now tell me, how do you feel? Jack narrowed his eyes. Like I just got jumped in an alleyway. The man chuckled. Good. That means you understand the reality of what's ahead. The people we protect face threats every day. Some are physical, some are psychological. We needed to see how you handle both. Jack frowned. And? The man leaned forward slightly. You didn't panic. You fought back, but you didn't lose control. You knew when to strike and when to step back. That's rare. Jack crossed his arms. So what now? The man handed him a small envelope. Inside, you'll find an address. Be there tomorrow at 8 a.m. That's when the real training begins. Jack stared at the envelope before taking it. And if I don't show up? The man's expression didn't change. Then this is where your story ends. Jack exhaled slowly. He had been looking for a sign, a way to turn his life around. And now, here it was, wrapped in mystery, danger, and the unknown. He glanced back at the man. See you at 8. As the SUV pulled away, Jack had no idea that this was just the beginning of something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The next morning, Jack arrived at the address exactly at 8 a.m. The location was nothing like he had expected. Instead of some high-tech government facility, it was an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Rusted metal doors, shattered windows, and faded graffiti covered the walls. Jack hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The interior was just as grim, dim lighting, a faint smell of dust and oil in the air. He could hear distant voices, footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. Right on time, Jack turned to see the same tall man from the night before, standing near a set of steel doors. He was wearing a tactical jacket now, looking even more imposing in the daylight. Follow me, the man said. Jack didn't argue. He was done asking questions. If he was going to do this, he needed to commit fully. They walked through a long corridor, passing doors with no labels. Occasionally, Jack would hear muffled voices or the sound of something heavy hitting the floor, like a body being thrown down. Finally, they stopped at a door at the end of the hallway. The man opened it and motioned for Jack to step inside. The room was empty except for a single table with 2 chairs. A woman sat on one side, wearing a crisp black suit. She was in her mid-40s, short dark hair, piercing blue eyes that studied Jack with unnerving intensity. Sit, she instructed. Jack obeyed. Do you know why you're here? She asked. Jack exhaled. Not exactly. The woman nodded as if she expected that answer. Your situation is unique. You stepped into something much bigger than you realize when you helped Barron Trump. Whether you intended to or not, you caught the attention of powerful people. Some see that as a threat, others see it as an opportunity. Jack leaned forward. And you? A slight smile touched the woman's lips. I see potential. Jack remained silent, waiting for her to continue. This isn't about politics, Jack. It's about power, influence, control. The kind of things that most people never see, but that shape the world around them. What happened to you, getting fired, being blacklisted, wasn't an accident. It was a warning. But instead of walking away, you chose to fight back. Jack clenched his jaw. I didn't really have a choice. There's always a choice, she countered. And you made the right one. Now, we're offering you another choice. You can walk out of here right now, pretend none of this ever happened, and go back to whatever life you can salvage. Or, you can let us train you, teach you how to survive in a world where knowing the right secrets is the only thing that keeps you alive. Jack stared at her. Who are you? The woman leaned back, crossing her arms. Let's just say, we operate in the shadows of those who think they control the world. We are the ones who make sure the real threats don't reach the surface. And if you're willing to learn, you might just become one of us. Jack hesitated. The logical part of his brain screamed at him to get up and leave. This was insane. It wasn't his fight. But deep down, something inside him had already decided. Where do we start? The woman's smile widened slightly. With the truth. She slid a file across the table. Jack hesitated before picking it up. The first page had a single name. Barron Trump. Jack looked up in confusion. What does he have to do with this? The woman's expression darkened. More than you could possibly imagine. Jack's heart pounded as he flipped through the file. Inside were documents, photographs, reports, things he had never seen before. Some pages were blacked out, entire paragraphs redacted. The first photograph was of Barron Trump, but not how Jack had last seen him. This wasn't the well-dressed, polite teenager he had met. In this picture, Barron was standing beside a group of men in suits, much older than him. Some had government badges. Others, Jack couldn't tell. Jack looked up at the woman. What is this? She tapped the folder. Everything they don't want you to know. Jack's eyes moved to the next document. It was a heavily classified report dated a few months ago. The headline read, Project Orion, Phase 2 Implementation. I don't understand. What does this have to do with Barron? The woman sighed. Tell me, Jack, why do you think you were fired? Jack clenched his jaw. Because I helped him. Wrong. She shook her head. You weren't just fired because you helped him. You were fired because you saw something you weren't supposed to see. Something that scared the people in power. Jack frowned. Saw what? The woman leaned forward. Barron Trump isn't just the son of a former president. He's the key to something much bigger. His intelligence, his upbringing, the people around him, it's all part of something carefully planned. He's not just another rich kid growing up in the public eye. He's been trained, conditioned, prepared for something. That hasn't even happened yet. Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. Prepared for what? The woman exhaled. That's what you're here to find out. Jack shook his head, flipping through more pages. There were notes on his own life, his childhood, his education, even his medical records. Why do you have information on me? The woman hesitated. Because you weren't chosen at random, Jack. Jack's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Think back to the day you helped Barron. What do you remember? Jack narrowed his eyes. I remember him being in trouble. I remember stepping in. And did you ever stop to ask yourself why he was in trouble in the first place? Jack's mind raced. The memory replayed in his head. Barron had looked scared, out of place, as if he had been caught somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. The men confronting him hadn't just been angry, they had been nervous, afraid. You think it was staged? Jack whispered. The woman smiled faintly. I think nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Jack exhaled sharply. So what now? You're saying my life was ruined because I got too close to the truth? That there's some grand conspiracy and I just stumbled into it? Your life wasn't ruined, Jack. It was redirected. The woman stood up. Now the real question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Jack clenched his fists. I want to know the truth. All of it. The woman smirked. Then let's begin. Jack took a deep breath as the woman led him down a dimly lit corridor. The air smelled of old paper and something metallic, like machines working behind walls he couldn't see. His mind was still racing from what she had just told him. Barron Trump wasn't just a regular teenager. He was being prepared for something. But what? The woman stopped in front of a steel door. She pulled out a keycard, swiped it, and the door unlocked with a heavy click. After you, she said. Jack stepped inside. The room was small, more like an archive than an office. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with folders, photographs, and old newspaper clippings. In the center of the room was a single wooden table covered in more documents. Sit, the woman instructed. Jack hesitated but pulled out a chair. The woman sat across from him, sliding a file toward him. This is everything we know about Project Orion. Jack opened the folder. The first page was an official-looking document marked classified. His eyes scanned the first few lines. Project Orion is a multi-phase operation aimed at the development of a new generation of global leadership, integrating advanced cognitive conditioning, strategic foresight training, and diplomatic scenario modeling. Primary candidates are selected based on genetic predisposition, environmental factors, and demonstrated intellectual capacity. Jack's stomach turned. What is this? Some kind of secret government training program? The woman nodded. Not just any training program. It's been running for decades. The world thinks leaders are elected, but the reality is, they're chosen. Groomed from childhood. Conditioned to think, act, and influence in ways the public will never suspect. Barron Trump is one of the latest subjects. Jack's fingers tightened on the paper. So, his entire life has been controlled? In many ways, yes. But something changed. He started questioning things. The program is designed to shape minds, but Barron resisted. He wanted to make his own choices. That's why he was in trouble the day you stepped in. He wasn't supposed to be where you found him. He was looking for answers, just like you are now. Jack exhaled sharply. And I got fired because I helped him. You didn't just help him. You became part of the equation. The moment you intervened, the people running the program saw you as a variable they hadn't accounted for. That made you dangerous. Jack closed the folder. So what now? If these people are so powerful, why am I still alive? The woman smirked. Because you're useful. They don't eliminate people unless they have to. Right now they're watching, waiting to see what you'll do next. If you choose to walk away, they might let you. But if you start digging deeper, Jack met her gaze, they'll come for me. Exactly. Silence filled the room. Jack's pulse pounded in his ears. Everything in him screamed to run, to forget he had ever heard any of this. But another part of him, the part that had always chased the truth, refused to back down. I need to see Barron, Jack said firmly. The woman's expression darkened. That's easier said than done. You said he was looking for answers. Maybe he still is. If I can find him— No, she interrupted. You don't find Barron Trump. He finds you. Jack frowned. What does that mean? The woman stood up, walking toward one of the shelves. She pulled out an old, yellowed envelope and handed it to him. This arrived for you yesterday. Jack hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single piece of paper. Written in elegant, deliberate handwriting were just 3 words. Trust no one. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the handwriting. It was Barron's. Jack stared at the note in his hands, his pulse quickening. The ink was fresh. Barron had written this recently, but how had he known where to send it? Who had delivered it? He looked up at the woman. Who gave this to you? She hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough to confirm his worst fear. I can't say, she finally admitted. Jack clenched his jaw. You don't trust me? It's not about trust. It's about survival. Her voice was calm, but Jack could see the tension in her posture. She was just as trapped in this web as he was. He took a deep breath, trying to think. Barron was out there, and he was trying to warn him. But of what? Tell me everything you know, Jack demanded. The woman sighed and sat down again, folding her hands in front of her. I don't know where Barron is. No one does. That's the point. When he disappeared, it wasn't just him running away. He had help. High-level help. Jack frowned. From whom? We don't know yet. But someone on the inside wanted him out, and they succeeded. The people who trained him? They're furious. They've lost control over something they thought was inevitable. Jack's mind raced. So they're hunting him? Yes. And now, they'll be watching you even more closely. You were a variable before. Now you're a liability. Jack leaned back, exhaling. He was in way over his head, and he knew it. But there was no turning back now. So what do I do? The woman hesitated. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small, black flash drive. This, she said, sliding it across the table. It's encrypted. You won't be able to open it alone. But if you find Barron, he can. Jack picked it up, turning it over in his fingers. What's on it? Everything. Files, documents, evidence of what they've done. What they're still doing. Barron wasn't just a participant. He was a prototype. The first of many. Jack's stomach twisted. You're saying there are others? The woman nodded grimly. The next generation of leaders, handpicked and engineered to be exactly what they want. No mistakes. No deviations. No free will. Jack clenched his fists. And Barron was their mistake? Their biggest one. Jack slipped the flash drive into his pocket. How do I find him? The woman shook her head. You don't. But if you make enough noise, he might find you. Jack exhaled. Great. So I just have to paint a target on my back and hope for the best? Welcome to the game, she said with a wry smile. Jack stood up, running a hand through his hair. He had a million questions, but only one mattered right now. Where do I start? The woman stood too, her eyes scanning the room as if she expected someone to be listening. There's a contact in New York. Former intelligence. He helped Barron before he vanished. If anyone knows where he is, it's him. She scribbled a name and address on a slip of paper and handed it to Jack. He glanced at it. And what about you? She smirked. Don't worry about me. I know how to disappear. Jack nodded. And I guess I'll see you when I see you. He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, she spoke again. Jack, he looked back. Be careful who you trust. Jack gave her a tight smile. Always. And with that, he walked out into the unknown. As Jake stepped into his small apartment that evening, he felt a strange mix of emotions. The last 48 hours had been the most intense of his life. Fired from his job for a simple act of kindness, he had spiraled into despair, only to find an unexpected ally in Barron Trump. Now, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone, rereading the message Barron had sent him. Stay strong. I might have a surprise for you tomorrow. A surprise? What could that mean? Jake wasn't sure if he should feel hopeful or if he was setting himself up for another disappointment. He had learned the hard way that life rarely handed out second chances. The next morning, he woke up to an unknown number calling him. With hesitation, he answered. Hello, Jake? This is Thomas Reynolds. I'm Barron's assistant. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Barron told me about what happened, Reynolds continued. And he thinks you deserve a second chance. Can you meet us at the Trump Tower in an hour? Jake almost dropped the phone. Trump Tower? As in, the actual Trump Tower? Yes, be there by 10 a.m. Jake barely had time to process the information before he was rushing to get dressed. He put on his best clothes, though they weren't much, combed his hair, and ran out the door. An hour later, he stood in the towering lobby of Trump Tower, feeling completely out of place among the polished floors and expensive suits. A security guard approached him. Jake Evans? Yeah. Follow me. He was led into an elevator that shot up to one of the top floors. The doors opened to reveal a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling, windows overlooking New York City. And there, standing in the middle of the room, was Barron Trump. Jake, you made it, Barron said, smiling. Jake hesitated. Yeah, still not sure why I'm here. Barron gestured to the sleek black chairs in front of a large desk. Sit down. We need to talk. Jake sat, his hands gripping the armrests as Barron leaned forward. I know what happened at your job. And I know you were treated unfairly. Jake sighed. Yeah, well, life isn't fair. Barron smirked. Maybe, but sometimes people can make it fair. That's why I called you here. My family has connections, as you probably guessed, and I think you deserve another shot. So, I pulled some strings. Jake blinked. Pulled some strings? What do you mean? A door opened and another man walked in. Tall, well-dressed, with an air of authority. Jake recognized him immediately. David Harrington, the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the country. Mr. Evans, Harrington said, extending a hand. I heard about your situation. Barron here tells me you're not just a good worker, but someone who stands up for what's right. That's the kind of person I want on my team. Jake shook his hand, still in shock. Wait, are you saying? I'm offering you a job, Jake, Harrington said with a grin. A real one. With better pay, better benefits, and most importantly, with people who actually appreciate integrity. Jake felt his throat tighten. Just yesterday, he thought his life was over, and now he was being offered something better than he could have ever dreamed of. Barron laughed. You look like you just saw a ghost. Jake exhaled sharply. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Barron said simply. Jake looked between them, his mind racing. Then without hesitation he nodded. Yes. The moment the word left his mouth, he felt as if the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. And just like that, everything changed. Jake could hardly believe what had just happened. One moment he was jobless, humiliated, and unsure of his future. The next, he had secured a position at one of the most prestigious tech firms in the country. All thanks to an unexpected act of kindness toward Barron Trump. As he left Trump Tower that day, his mind was spinning. He kept checking his phone, half expecting to wake up and realize it was all a dream. But every notification, from the official job offer email to Barron's simple text message, told you I had a surprise, reminded him that this was very real. That evening, Jake sat in his apartment, staring at the skyline through his window. Just days ago, he had felt hopeless, believing that one mistake had cost him everything. Now, he had a fresh start, a job with a future, and the confidence that standing up for what was right had actually led him somewhere better. As the weeks passed, he settled into his new position. His colleagues respected him. His boss valued his integrity, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Then, one evening, as he was packing up for the day, his phone buzzed. It was another message from Barron. Hope you're liking the new job. Next time, dinner's on me. Jake chuckled. He never thought that helping someone out, especially someone as high profile as Barron Trump, would lead to a complete turnaround in his life. But it had. And as he walked out of the office that night, he realized something important. Sometimes, the worst moments in life are just the setup for something greater. The end.